Welcome to Hyde Talk. I'm your host, Jen Lobozzo. Hyde Talk is an open and honest conversation focused on character, leadership, education, and parenting. Today's special guest is Malcolm Gauld. Malcolm, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Of
nice
course.
to be here.
Yeah, luckily you live pretty locally, so this was an easy interview to have.
Easy commute.
Easy commute. That's what I always say. Best commute. So, true to Hyde fashion, we're going to dive right in. And you have a very long-standing history with Hyde School as the son of the founder. But I'd like to talk about your experience as a child and what are some of your earliest memories of Hyde and how did that play into your upbringing?
I remember my parents driving us up here when I was 11, 12, I guess 11, and seeing this mansion and my father explaining how there was going to be a school here. And I don't think my sisters and I don't think we really saw that. It was a lot to imagine, but he was a man of deep imagination. But Hyde School had a huge impact on me personally as a student. I had done very well in school as a young kid through around fourth grade, and then got in. My mother called it the wrong crowd. I kept hearing that a lot when I was in fifth, sixth grade, and they actually sent me to a junior boarding school outside Boston when I was in the seventh grade, and I never did well. I was a class clown, in trouble a lot at school, stayed after a lot. And, I always thought that school was rigged. And I still pretty much feel that way, that it's based on a certain set of abilities. They tell you it's about your effort, but I think it's more than maybe schools want to admit. It's about the ability. And I just felt I wasn't going to do well in that system. And so I ended up basically sabotaging my own education. But then Hyde was a place that just made a huge difference in my life, put me on a whole different trajectory.
Well, let's talk about that more specifically. When did you start here as a freshman?
I started as a freshman, 14, but basically I applied to a bunch of other boarding schools and was not accepted to any of them because of my behavior and performance in middle school. So I came to Hyde reluctantly. I really didn't like the idea of being the head of school's son. I wanted to be one of the guys. I figured I wouldn't be one of the guys, and it was all guys because it was an all-boys school for the first 5 years. But, the thing I remember, in many ways, Hyde is very different today than it was then, but the one thing that was consistent was they really cared about our effort, whether we worked hard or not. They didn't care how smart we were. I'd heard a lot of schools before say that, but I also saw people who get awards who maybe were just smart and didn't necessarily work very hard. So I just didn't believe that about school before Hyde. But at Hyde, they meant it. I saw kids that worked really hard who got privileges even though they struggled mightily with the material. And I saw the opposite. Kids who were really smart but were told they didn't have a good learning attitude. Because they really didn't just talk about the attitude, they meant it. All the reward system was based on that. And so I said, well, I guess I better work here because it looks like you get in trouble if you don't. And so I started doing that and started getting good grades, and I wanted more of that. I wanted to do more of that. And so I took academics seriously. I always took athletics seriously, but I got to go to a great college, and I was not a kid on a trajectory on that trajectory. And Hyde School was the place that put me on that trajectory. And I think at that time, it was that effort emphasis really standing behind it as a school. And I like to think that's what we still offer today, even though we offer a lot more than that too.
Absolutely. Agree with that. Can you, taking you back again, specifically name a moment in which that trajectory for you switched, or there was a mindset, or maybe it was a specific moment, maybe it was a person, something formative about your.
Well, there were certainly teachers that really believed in me, and I can remember being challenged to take marine biology when I hadn't taken regular biology. And it was, marine biology was sort of, it's just the way the schedule worked out for me. And I remember being just thoroughly confused and not understanding it. But the teacher just really, really helped me through it, and sometimes it was pep talks. Sometimes it was, you're better than that. It was the kick in the pants and a bear hug, as we often say around here. Also, I remember one moment that was huge was I've always loved athletics. I was kind of a one-sport athlete. I was really into lacrosse and still am into lacrosse. But I played basketball. And my junior year, I didn't play very much in the varsity. And I went to the coach senior and I said, "You're probably not going to play me much more this year than you did last year, are you?" And he was very blunt. He said, "Nope, I'm not." So I said, "How about letting me coach the JVs?" I said, I've been sitting on your bench for a couple of years, and I certainly have seen what you do. And my dad was a coach, and I have a real interest in that. And he said, "Okay." So he sat on the bench with me for the first couple of games to make sure I knew what I was doing. And then by the third, fourth game, I can't remember when, but he said, "Hey, coach your team. It's yours." And I got to do that as a senior at Hyde, and it was a great responsibility. And I just don't know many schools that would take a step like that. So some of those things, lifelong friendships. I mean, we just recently had our 50th reunion of our class, and I don't know, 17 of us, half the class came back. And those are still some of the most important relationships in my life.
Yeah, meaningful connections.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And now I do want to talk about that coaching piece a bit for you. And did that spur a love of coaching? Because that's something that you have done throughout your professional career.
I went on and I played lacrosse at Bowdoin College in the 70s and began my teaching career at a traditional prep school, Trinity Pauling School in New York, which was a great opportunity. I kind of had this sense I'm probably going to end up back at Hyde maybe, but I want to start somewhere where nobody knows me and see what happens. And I still have relationships with some of those kids who are now well into their 60s that I taught and coached then. But thought I wanted to go that route. Almost became a college lacrosse coach. Came very close to doing that, and decided to move in another direction. But that was such a big part of my life, and still is really. But yeah, I mean, I over time, I think coaching's like anything. You get better at it the more you do it, and the more you borrow from other people. I went through the phase where, no, I'm going to do it my way. And I learned that that's not necessarily the best way to go, that you have to be open to lots of different ways to do it. And just fell in love with the coaching, and not just lacrosse. I coached basketball, but I also coached some of the best experiences I had was coaching women's soccer. And I played football in high school. I didn't even play soccer, but I got into it, really got into it in my 20s. And had a lot of fun with it. And the thing I always say about coaching is I've had so many alums come back and say, "Hey, remember that game against Hebron or Kents Hill, which are a couple of our rivals, when we were down by 4 goals and we came back and almost pulled it off at the end?" I get so many stories like that. I'd love to tell you that I also get stories of kids who come back and say, "Hey, remember that midterm on the Civil War?" Because I taught history for many years, but I don't. I don't get many kids who come back and say that. No. Even though I think we had a pretty good history class and a pretty good history department at Hyde. But I think the cool thing about sports is this, the instant nature of it. It's right now, and we're going to go out there and play this game right now, or this practice right now. And so many things happen in the moment. Right.
I'm sure your history class was very emotionally charged, but I think sports, there's something about it in which you're leaving all on the field. There's more input that goes in there, and emotions and effort.
But there is nothing. It is really nice, though, when a student does say that they remember something about the class, and that's pretty special too.
Right. Or quote you back to you.
Yeah, that's when I said, wow, somebody was listening.
Yeah, right. Excellent. Yeah, it wasn't just me. Yeah. Now I'd like to pivot and talk about, you've talked about your role as a coach, as a teacher, and now you also have a very important role as a father. And so, what are some of the leadership qualities that you think played into who you became as a father? Let's talk about some of those.
Well, I think one of the best things about Hyde is that everybody who's here, whether you're a student, a teacher, or a parent, buys into this ethos that we're all works in progress, and we're all trying to be better versions of ourselves. And parents are often surprised when they come here because they think we're going to teach them, sometimes they think we're going to teach them techniques on the finer points of child raising. And instead, I think what we're saying to them is, hey, you want to be a better parent? Then be a better person.
Yeah.
And have your kids see you trying to be a better person.
Right. It's a lifelong journey.
Like I was a kid who, I was a parent. I think throughout my life, I've been a worrier. I worry too much about what could go wrong, what might go wrong. Oh, did we do that well enough? I do that at work. I do that in my home. It's too much, and it's not productive. And I really learned that as a Hyde parent when my kids were here, and my kids pointed that out to me.
I'm sure.
And I still do it, but it's one of those things where here I am. I wasn't, when my kids were here, I was into my 50s and worked on that, on a personal nature. And they saw me doing that. And I think that was good. The joke, and Hyde serves a lot of kind of kids. The joke in my family is that Joe Gauld had to start a school so his son would have a place to go. And I think there's probably a certain amount of truth to that, but that certainly was not the case with my daughters. They were really good students and really good athletes, but we wouldn't have had them go anywhere else other than Hyde. And after Hyde, they went to good colleges, which is great. But the way they're running their lives today, the way they're both in marriages, and one of them has a couple of children, and I think we're all kind of in sync that idea of let's be a better version of ourselves. I believe they're passing that on to their children, and they're modeling that themselves. And to me, that's what it's really all about. College placement is important, and most prep schools like ours, we tout the percentage, 98% or whatever of kids who go to four-year schools, and that's great. Mm-hmm. But that's not what it's about. What it's about is what kind of person you're going to be 20 years from now. And I think that that's where we try to keep our focus.
Absolutely. And it's not just, you as a father you couldn't just drop your kids off.
Right.
You couldn't just drop them at the door and say, see ya at the end of the school year. It was you yourself were invested in your own lifelong journey of bettering yourself.
Yeah, we often say school is for kids, Hyde is for families. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. And we were just starting that in the 70s, and I think we've now developed much more of a program and a philosophy and a track to run on, if you will. Whereas back in the 70s, my dad was just experimenting with a lot of different ways to bring parents into the mix. But the other thing I often say is if you take great teaching and put it up against bad parenting wins 99% of the time. So what we need to do is if we both if the parents and the teachers be the best that they can be, that's the best formula for raising and teaching kids.
Mm-hmm. Right. And the home is the primary classroom.
Yeah.
So we can do all we can here.
Yeah.
But yet
we're temporary influence.
Absolutely.
Yes. And when we all get on the same page, that's a really powerful force. Mm-hmm.
I do want to talk about your time as a head of school. And marry this idea, because recently we've been talking about character culture and the importance of culture in an educational setting. When you were a head of school, how much did you think about that in terms of your community at the time?
A lot. I've always said that the 5 words of Hyde, courage, integrity, leadership, curiosity, concern, are my true north and always have been since I was 14, 15 years old. Maybe I hadn't totally bought in, but by 17, 18, I'd bought in. And since then, if my life's not going the way I'd like it to be going, that's my first look is, well, let's do a little personal inventory on those 5 words. How we doing on those? And maybe it's something else, but I always start there. And those have been just ingrained. And I think we've always tried to do that as a school. As a second generation educator, I have observed that American schools, I believe, have been in decline for a long time. You know, and American schools were the envy of the world. You don't hear that as much anymore.
That's true.
And why is that? I believe, if you gave me a 15-second soundbite, we care more about what they can do than about who they are, and they know it. And they are the 50 million kids who go to our schools in this country. Give me another 15-second soundbite for the solution, and I would say we need to value attitude over aptitude, effort over ability, and character over talent. And I can say with a full heart, that's what Hyde School tries to do. That's what the Hyde Institute tries to do. That's what the Hyde Discovery process tries to do, is let's value attitude, effort, and character first. But let's not just say it, let's mean it. And I think that was true when I was a student. It's what I tried to do when I was head of school. And I think it's what the school is trying to do now.
Yes, I, as a faculty in it and approaching a new school year, certainly that's always a forefront, whether we're in the classroom, performing arts, sports arena, whatever it may be. So you brought up the Hyde Discovery process and the Hyde Institute. Let's dive more into that. And so where was this idea born, and how did that come to fruition? And what is that? What is the Hyde Institute and Discovery process? We know in the day-to-day, but I'd love to hear where that was first planted.
Well, some of it's personal. I mean, there's a personal part. You know, I think I used to, when I was a young head of school, I was appointed head of school in 87. And
how old were you?
I was 33. And didn't really know what I was doing. And some would say not much has changed, but I just felt that school, you know, I've said it before, school is rigged and it needs to focus on effort. But I would trudge home at the end of the day sometimes and I'd go, am I just working at a school for rich kids? You know, is that what I'm doing? Like, you know, we're doing some amazing things, but not every kid could access this. There's boarding schools are expensive places to go to school.
Yes. And
so we've always been a private school with a public purpose. That's always been who we are. And we've actually started, I think the trap that private schools fall into is what I call the perpetuation of the institution at an ever-increasing standard of luxury. That's what we start doing. We start building kind of palatial campuses, and then we also start judging our success according to the number of kids we're able to exclude. Where I went to college, I think, does that. You know, we used to take 1 out of 8, and now we take, 1 out of 6, so we must be better.
Right.
We wanted to judge our success according to how many we could include. And so not everybody's going to be able to do this. Not everybody's going to be able to come to a school like this. So let's try to articulate the program better so it can be articulated and shared in other settings. And so that's what we've tried to do, whether starting charter schools in New York and Florida and Washington, D.C., which we've done, serving deeply underserved populations of students, or creating the discovery process, which is kind of a distilled Hyde model to work on some of these, to work on these 5 words, these 5 principles, this idea of unique potential. And because, and I also think it's made Hyde itself better, because we used to always say about Hyde, it's caught, it's not taught. You know, we would often say, years back, we would often say, well, you need to come, you need to go see it, you need to experience it. And not everybody's going to be able to see it. Not everyone's going to be able to experience. And so we've made a real effort to try to put it into a platform where someone can log on and get the essence of the lessons and that character culture. And so that's what fueled the development of the discovery process.
And how long ago did this start?
Well, there's been some schools in Pennsylvania that got turned on to Hyde 20 years ago and started developing a program, which we helped them initially, but didn't really help them much. They kind of did it on their own. And then I finally checked back with them in 2018. And in 2019, a core of us got together, some of those public schools, some of these charter schools that we started, and our boarding school faculty, and said, how do we put the best practices of all of these places together on an online portal that a teacher can log on to and access. And so we started that in 2019. And then we were all set to launch, and we got shut down by COVID 2 years in a row. And then finally launched last year in a dozen schools in 6 different states. And I do think it's been mutually beneficial. I think it's much better for the thing I feel really good about is incoming faculty now. They don't have to wander around, wonder what's going on here. There's a very clearly articulated set of learning content and training materials, and I think it brings people up to speed a lot faster.
So now when you say those schools, particularly in Pennsylvania, that are doing Hyde, what does that look like, especially in a public school model? It's easy, so easy for us. It's our day-to-day at this boarding school campus. So what does it look like in a public school?
Boiled down to its truly basic elements, what we're saying is take your homerooms, which is a public school concept, make them mixed age, which is we got a lot of pushback on that.
Super foreign.
And start every morning with a 10 to 15 minute check-in. How's it going? What's your goal for the day? How'd yesterday go? Who's doing a good job? Who's maybe struggling with something after the trust develops in the group? But these become teams, supportive teams that challenge and support each other. And then let's go off to algebra class or math class or wherever it is we're going. Also, these schools get in the habit of what we call the debrief during the course of a day. Might be the end of a Spanish class or a JV soccer practice or a play rehearsal or a school assembly. Hey, how'd we just do? Who did a good job? Who's an unsung hero maybe in the group that's really working hard? But these kids start sharing, supporting each other. And now there's 134 lessons in the program to do when you get in these groups. There's 10 hours of training. But the essence of the program is, let's look out for each other.
Right.
I mean, everyone agrees that kids are bummed. It's every
country.
study, the CDC, just the Center for Disease Control, just did a major study. The kids have a lot of sadness and hopelessness in schools. And everyone agrees something needs to happen. But what I don't think people are getting on the right page with is we believe that the kids are going to have to participate in their own resurrection. We're not going to double down on counselors and fix this. The kids need to support that. And a buzzword these days is social and emotional learning.
Yes.
But what I always have come to say is social and emotional learning demands social and emotional teaching. So the teachers are going to have to change. And some teachers will say, well, I was hired to teach math and that's what I do. And they need to be challenged. Yeah, you need to teach math, but these kids are bringing so much into the school that we need to help them with their social and emotional development,
right?
And they'll be better students. And so that's a guiding premise of what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I hear you talking about bolstering culture through common language, shared experience, and that social emotional learning component, which, yes, is such a buzzword in education. My inbox will actually be flooded with, I call them spam, but it's these social emotional packages that go ahead for this price, you can purchase it. So what do you think sets the Hyde discovery process aside from the others?
I think the mixed age. We actually we actually hired a firm to help us with research and did a competitive scan of 12 other SEL providers to address that very question. And the thing we came away with is the essence, the group that stays together. I mean, some of these schools in Pennsylvania, you start in a discovery group in the 6th grade and you're in that same group through the 12th grade.
Wow.
So there have been marriages. There have been people who've come back and taught at the school for being in that. So that's really buying in. The mixed age thing, which is some schools do the program without the mixed age, we think they miss out on something because that really develops a rapport among the older. The older kids start acting like role models, and the younger kids stop fearing the older kids, and kind of, and it says there's a real connection that happens there. We have a student jobs program where the students participate once a month in maintaining. It might be a litter patrol, or it might be washing windows or something like that.
Sweeping,
but again, that's a big pushback, and I guess my pushback to the pushback is, how did we ever get to the place as a culture where the idea that kids would participate in maintaining the cleanliness of their learning space would be a radical idea? But that's where we are. And so those are just some of the things and I guess finally a big one is that I don't see any other program that does, is our adults, the teachers, are not just facilitators, they're participants. So we're working on this stuff right alongside them. We're doing the lesson. We're sharing where we are, and we're thereby modeling for our students that we're works in progress. That the development of our character is a lifelong process. And I don't see that in most of the other programs I've looked at, and we've really looked at them pretty closely.
I do want to touch base on something we were able to have this summer, which was hosting a Hyde Institute here with teachers from all over the country, or Northeast, basically, but charter school, public school, private school. I thought it was powerful being a participant and facilitating a bit. What were some big takeaways for you out of that as you move forward with working on having the discovery process be accessible in public schools?
Well, there's a lot in the educational world, everyone agrees that we've got a lot of issues, but those 3 types of schools don't generally come together, the privates, the publics, and the public charters. There's even some animosity among those 3. And so to get all 3 types in the same room and sharing their best practices and how can we have a better culture, the whole theme of that summit, we called it the Best Practices Summit, was culture. How are we going to get our cultures where we want to get them? And because one of the slogan, if the Hyde discovery process has a slogan, it's every school has a culture, is yours by design or default. You're going to have a culture. There's no escaping that. So the question is are you going to design that culture and cultivate it and nurture it, or are you going to let it happen to you? And it was I really enjoyed it as a lifelong educator to be in a room with people that were sharing that stuff. And I think we all walked away with ideas we can take back to our schools. And so that was pretty special. And
the idea that there's hope. We had Tom Moore on the previous podcast, and he there's this idea of hope that we have a vision for education, and everyone in that room, had that common idea, that shared goal and vision, and everyone just had that instant connection. I thought it was amazing.
And I sometimes get accused, maybe fairly, of being a very big critic of what's going on in schools today. But there's also a lot of great things that have happened in schools historically. I mean, the idea of access is so different than it was when I was a kid. Lauren and I had our son had pretty profound special needs on the autism spectrum, and I'm so glad he didn't go to the schools that I attended in the 60s, which were those students were separated off and you never encountered them. And we saw they were here, but you could tell it was carefully orchestrated for us not to ever run into each other. And now there's my son had a much more of a mainstream experience, so there's some really good things going on.
Right.
You can tell there's a but coming. I just feel we need to make that switch of who these kids are matters more than what they can do. And I think we're gripped by test mania too much. And you end up evaluating teachers on how well their kids do on tests, which teaches them to game the tests. It teaches them to not work with the students who could hurt that. I mean, it's just, there's so many problems with that.
And the focus is just in a different area.
Yeah. And we're trying to, and I think the focus on who are these kids? What do they feel? And what kind of people are they? And the thing that, returning back to your first question, I mean, the thing that Hyde School put in me was, I think, as a student and as a teacher, the long game is the game that matters. Not the test we're going to take next April to see how everyone is progressing in a particular subject matter, but the long game. And it taught me, like, for example, my parents and Hyde School, and being an honest person is the most important thing. And that will cost you sometimes in the short term, but in the long term, it's better all the way around. You're going to do better, and you're going to feel better about yourself, which is going to help you do better. And so I guess I would like to see our schools across the country move a little bit more to the long game, to a more of a preoccupation with the long game. And I think we're overly preoccupied with the short game.
Well, I first heard this term from you, but the idea of effort savings bank.
Yeah.
So you're putting in all this effort. You might not see the results in the short term, but you're going to cash in the long term. And with that said, with all the work that you're doing now, when I don't know that you'll ever retire, but when you're focused maybe in a different direction as a grandfather, as a husband, where is your hope or vision that when you're out of this, what is the discovery process doing, across the country, locally, where?
No, that's been our hope, is to be, we'd love to be in 1,000 schools someday. I mean, that was kind of the original idea that we had when we started talking about this. But and I guess that's my hope, is that will be the emphasis. I just think we're focused on the wrong thing. The question that I'm asked the most when I'm talking with schools about potentially adopting is, can you show that it improves test scores? And part of me feels like the answer is yes. I mean, every school that's done it has found that to be true. But I feel like I'm selling out by answering the question, because I think it's the wrong question. So I feel like I'm feeding into a paradigm that's just unsound. And I guess I get that from my dad. That's how my dad always felt. But, because that's not the issue. I look at now, I've done this long enough. I mean, it's so weird to say this, but I've now watched 16-year-old kids cross the threshold of our door and then retire from the workplace, okay, and everything that goes on in between. Okay, the first kids that I taught are well into their 60s. And so if I have any vantage point that maybe the typical faculty member at Hyde or anywhere else wouldn't have, is I've seen how it turns out. I've seen how it actually turns out, what actually happens. And it's not about where they went to college. It's not about how well they even did in college. It's about the kind of people they are.
Right.
And that becomes the kind of parents they are, and the kind of whether they're participants in the communities in which they live. And that's what really matters. Mm-hmm. And I would love to see our schools across this country preoccupy themselves with that,
right?
Rather than the short-term goals where we seem to currently be focused.
Yeah, let's start asking the right questions. So,
yeah,
excellent. Well, on a personal level, I've learned a lot from you in my time here at Hyde, and I think there's still so much to give, and I firmly believe and feel proud to be a part of. Let's, be an agent of change for education. There's blue ocean possibilities for, who we could reach there outside of the gates, as we typically say.
I agree.
Yeah. Well, It's been such a pleasure chatting with an accomplished author, a Bowdoin grad. So many more have much more to learn from you and everything that we do here. So hopefully one day we get to reach that.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, absolutely. You have been watching Hyde Talk, and I'm Jen Lobozzo. Be sure to check us out on your favorite social media platforms and also your favorite podcast platforms. We'll see you next time.